Okay, so welcome to the Stanford Digital Economy Lab lunch. I'm Eric Brynjolfsson, and today's speaker is Tamay Besiroglu. Tamay is the co-founder of Epic AI, a multidisciplinary research institute investigating the trajectory of AI. He recently co-founded Mechanize, which builds RL environments to simulate real-world work on scenarios for AI development. We welcome and encourage questions during the seminar. If you're in the Zoom audience, please submit your questions using the Q&A function, and we'll read them. For those of you here at Stanford, just raise your hand and I'll call on you, or we'll bring a mic over to you so you can ask questions. So Tamay is going to talk about something that we've all been experiencing here for some time, why economists and AI experts disagree about the future. Tamay, take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Eric. I'm Tamay. I'm one of the co-founders of Mechanize, which is this company that builds reinforcement learning environments where we simulate kind of white-collar work, and we sell these to AI labs. They use these to train their models so that those models can basically automate white-collar work. Our goal is to enable the full automation of the economy. Before I started this, I did some economics research, and I spent a lot of time talking to economists as well as AI experts about the future of economic growth and the impacts of AI and so on, which I know Eric has spent probably like 20 years thinking about as well. So I think one thing that's just very striking is that there's this really deep disagreement between AI researchers and economists. So my talk will focus on this disagreement about the impacts on economic growth, where on the one hand, economists basically expect that we're going to get 2% economic growth forever. So this is a plot from results from a survey that some people at Yale did of like prominent economists. Daron, I guess Eric, you're polled in this survey as well. I think Chad Jones was also in the room with us. Angus Deaton, Robert Gordon, a bunch of very prominent growth economists and macroeconomists and so on, economic historians, and they find that economists basically expect 2% growth this century, with a fairly narrow confidence interval around 1 to 4%. By contrast, you have the AI experts, and they think something totally different. So here you have Paul Cristiano, who is one of the co-inventors of reinforcement learning from human feedback, which is this cornerstone technique for training modern AI systems. And he says that he thinks there's a 40% chance that we'll get a Dyson sphere by 2040. And a Dyson sphere, for those who don't know, is this concept introduced by Freeman Dyson in the 50s, I believe, as a way for an advanced civilization to power itself. It involves building this system of collectors around that orbit the sun to harvest the power that the sun produces, so you can harvest the energy. And obviously, in order to get a Dyson sphere in 15 years, that would require this enormous acceleration of our economic, industrial, and technological capacity. So clearly, there's this very strong disagreement between the economists and AI experts. So the economists expect 2% forever, and then the AI researchers expect this drastic acceleration to happen sometime this century. And it isn't just Paul Cristiano. I think like Leopold Aschenbrenner, who wrote this popular essay, Situational Awareness, in it he writes that he thinks that we might get like triple-digit growth rates in the US economy. Carl Schumann, who is another AI expert who's thought about these questions for a long time, also expects doubling times that are even faster than that, but on the order of months or even weeks. This is like not an unpopular opinion among some AI experts. So I'm going to talk about why is there this enormous disagreement that exists between AI researchers and economists. But before I talk about why I think this exists, I just want to give a brief summary of at least one argument for why one might expect AI to produce this like explosive economic growth. And the most compelling argument for why I think the development of AI that can flexibly substitute for human labor might result in this explosive growth is an argument that comes from semi-endogenous growth theory, which in part is developed by the person sitting in front, Chad Jones, as well as some other people. And this argument, starts with this observation that there are increasing returns to scale in economic production. A basic fact about economic growth in the long run is that economic growth has accelerated over the past 10,000 years, and probably longer than that. But here is this famous hockey stick graph. So on the y-axis, we have gross world product, the total amount of economic output. I'm okay taking questions, yeah.
That's levels. It's hard to tell if that's just steady exponential from your chart.
Oh no, it's a log. This is log transformed. So
it is. Oh yeah, sorry.
So if it was exponential, then it would be a straight.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I misread the y-axis.
Yep. So clearly it has accelerated because we have on a log plot we have this kind of hockey stick, and the best explanation, in my view, for why this has occurred is that we have increasing returns to scale that is due to the non-rivalry of ideas. And just to explain that for the non-economists in the room, non-rivalry of ideas means that ideas are this kind of special type of economic output. Unlike conventional goods, like if I have 10 workers and I have to give all of them a computer, I have to buy 10 computers. But if I have 100 workers, then I have to buy 100 computers. Ideas are special in the sense that you can invent an idea once, and that can be reused by an arbitrary number of workers. So the chain rule in calculus, or the Python programming language, or flash attention, or something like that, is something that is an idea or a technology that can be reused by an arbitrary number of workers, as long as they can understand and apply those ideas. And so that makes ideas this kind of special good. And so just to kind of give a brief illustration of how this works, suppose we have an economy where this economy produces crops which sustain some number of workers. And suppose also that this is like a Malthusian society where population growth is bottlenecked by our ability to produce food. So the more food we produce, the more humans we can support. And so these workers, they have ideas, and those ideas make them more productive. So they can apply their own labor in a way that's more efficient. They can produce more output. So they can produce more crops, which enables them to sustain a larger population. And that population can once again have ideas that makes themselves more efficient at producing crops. And so you have this feedback loop that goes from kind of ideas to more output, to being able to sustain a larger population, to having then more ideas, and so on. This gives rise to this feedback loop that results in the kind of hyper-exponential growth that we've seen historically. So if we have a 2x increase in output in crops, we can expand by 2x all the relevant key inputs, labor, and we can invest in capital and build plows, which results in but because we have this additional improvement in technology, we can also use those inputs more efficiently, which results in a greater than 2x of the output, which we can then reinvest in increasing all the key inputs again, and that gives rise to this kind of hyper-exponential growth that we've seen throughout much of economic history. So if you work out the relevant equations from semi-endogenous growth theory, you'll find that it behaves as this differential equation, which gives rise to hyperbolic growth. This kind of ended because obviously we have this constant exponential growth that we've seen since the post-war period. And the reason this ended is because we had the demographic transition and we stopped reinvesting our output into sustaining ever larger populations. And so, today, if we have a 2x increase in output, we can't have this like 2x increase of all the relevant inputs. We can invest in capital, but there isn't a sense in which we can kind of accumulate our labor force by basically feeding ever larger populations and growing our population much more. That's not something that we currently do. And so there's a sense in which labor is no longer accumulable like it was when we lived in this Malthusian condition. And so we have this 2x increase in output. We can't reinvest it in increasing all of our inputs. And so we get this kind of fizzling out that explains the current post-war economic growth, which is this constant exponential on the order of like 2 to 3%. And that's what we see today. But then, what happens if you have AI that can flexibly substitute for human workers? In that case, labor once again becomes accumulable because we can reinvest our output into sustaining kind of larger populations of AI workers. Another way to think about this is, AI effectively turns labor into a type of capital. And so if we have this 2x increase in output, we can now again increase all the key inputs. We can increase capital, and we can have this substitute for labor that we can also double. And you also get this additional boost from technology, which makes all of that more productive. And so you get a greater than doubling of output, which you can then reinvest and restart this kind of feedback loop. And so the prediction then is that this would once again give rise to the super exponential growth that we've seen historically. So there's a couple of things that I like about this specific argument. So one thing I like is that it fits the economic historical data relatively well. It explains this initial hyper exponential growth period. It also predicts what would happen if our society stopped reinvesting our output into sustaining ever larger populations. It would predict that that would then grow on the order of the rate of population growth, which is basically precisely what we see today. And so it fits the data pretty well, which is a reason to prefer this theory over other theories. One other reason I like it is because it was like developed before people were really thinking about AI. It was developed in the 90s. And so I'm less suspicious about motivated reasoning than I am with like papers today where people have these opinions about AI and what its impacts are going to be, and then they write down a theory and it conveniently matches what they previously thought. Like that's not an accusation you can throw at this theory because it was developed prior to. Not sure what happened. So this was developed prior to when people were seriously thinking about AI. Unless, Chad, were you thinking about AI when you were? Great. So we have this argument, but why are economists so skeptical about AI causing this drastic acceleration in our economic and technological capacity? I think there's like a lot of reasons, and I spent quite a bit of time talking to a bunch of economists, and one thing that one thing that like surprises me is just the variety of arguments that they will give me. So the solo paradox is one. Maybe we'll have regulation that will just choke off the impacts that AI might have. Maybe automation is going to be very slow because it's going to take a very long time to diffuse the relevant technology, and it just draws things out, and the growth rates are not going to be quite as high. Maybe it's just hard to build AI, like it's just something that's hard. Maybe we'll have these strong preferences for things that humans produce. We'll have difficulties with alignment and so on. And I think one thing that's kind of interesting is that there isn't really a canonical explanation of why AI's impacts are going to be limited. Like economists tend to agree that AI won't cause this drastic acceleration of economic growth, despite the fact that we have some good theoretical reasons to expect this. But then they agree with the conclusion, but then they like totally disagree about which arguments are most compelling. And I think that's kind of telling. But I want to focus on two sources of skepticism. I guess one more thing to say is that many of these arguments are often like not quantitatively specific. So they'll say things like, well, regulation is just going to, the reason we can't have like much faster than 2% growth is because of regulation. But then like the regulation theory of growth like it doesn't make quantitative predictions, or at least I haven't seen people work it out in sufficient detail to be able to make quantitative predictions about what rates are kind of ruled in by the theory and what rates are ruled out. I think a similar thing is true when economists talk about Baumol effects, which are this class of kind of arguments which say that when you have complements in production, when you have multiple inputs and they all need to be there in sufficient quantity for you to be able to produce this output, and when you can automate some parts of the inputs but not others, then you're going to see these Baumol effects that choke off growth. But then you actually need to work out a bunch of the quantitative specific details to be able to figure out what rates are ruled in versus ruled out. And often this isn't like done to my satisfaction, or I haven't seen it done in detail. And I think that's one reason to find it somewhat suspicious. By contrast, some of the arguments in favor of expecting this growth are often nice and quantitatively specific. So there's one argument that I actually quite like, which just looks at the payback times of data center GPUs. So a B200 chip, that is the data center GPU that's kind of the frontier one produced by NVIDIA, it costs about $50,000 to buy. And people have done some calculations about how much processing the human brain does. And it turns out that this data center GPU does roughly the same amount of computation on the same order as the human brain, about 1E15 flop per second. And so if you have software that is as efficient as the human brain that you can run on this chip, then you can expect to maybe generate as much as human wages, which is on the order of $100,000 roughly, which is enough to buy back another GPU. And so you should expect that you should be able to generate as much value required to buy a GPU on the order of a year. And so that gives you a reason to expect yearly doubling times of the amount of output we produce. And that's like a nice quantitatively specific argument. And some of these arguments are just kind of, wish-washy and not very specific. And that's one thing I don't like. So, I'm going to focus on two specific sources of skepticism that I think are pretty common. So one is this like strong anchoring on the post-war economic period. And here we see gross world product on a log scale, and then also time, which I've also log transformed. And so a constant exponential looks like this curved, this concave function. And so, that fits the data very well. A constant exponential fits this data just incredibly well. And so economists will say, well, we should just expect that to continue because it just explains the data really well. And so we should just extrapolate that. But then it turns out that it only fits the data well in the post-war period. But if you fit a constant exponential on like a longer series, you'll find that it fits it just really terribly, right? This black line. Instead, the power law fits the data just much better. So then an economist might say, well, there's this like bias variance trade-off. You might throw away a bunch of data and get more variance, but you get a series that's less biased. So this is a standard statistical decision you want to make. You have this trade-off, and you might throw away all the early data because farming and foraging and that's not super relevant to our current economic condition, and so you might throw that away. And I think that's fine, but then you have to like eat the higher variance, and then you have to say, okay, we have this shorter series, and so we should be less confident about how long this series is going to last. Like there's standard kind of statistical rules of thumb about if you have a pattern that persists for 80 years, then a reasonable thing to do is to expect that it might continue for another 80 years. Like this is Laplace's rule of succession. And so you should say that, well, I think there's a 50% chance roughly that this breaks down in the next 80 years. But obviously economists aren't doing that. So, they're like making this bias variance trade-off, but then they're not accepting the fact that they should be more uncertain if they throw away a lot of the data. I think another source of skepticism is just that economists are just kind of very conservative as like a discipline, and so they don't want to entertain these more radical ideas of what AI might be able to do in the future. I think there's one interesting way in which this shows up. So in economics, you have this distinction between automation on the intensive margin of having more of the same automation happen. Maybe it becomes cheaper. Maybe you have GPT-4, but it becomes cheaper, and those capabilities become more widespread. And then you also have this notion of automation along the extensive margin, having new capabilities that you didn't previously have. And economists will focus on automation on this intensive margin. You have today's capabilities, but they become more widespread and more diffuse and cheaper and more efficient. They don't focus on this extensive margin. And I think here are a couple examples of cases in which this happens. And if you look at this, so here's this example from this book, Prediction Machines, which came out I don't know, 5 years ago. But roughly when it came out, the thing that was in vogue in AI was wasn't LLMs. It was classification, classifying images, or regression tasks, predicting whether someone would pay back their loan and things like this. And so people these economists wrote this book about what happens when you have those technologies that were vogue then become cheaper and more widespread. And so they say what will happen with AI, or what will AI technologies make so cheap? It'll make cheap prediction. But that's obviously not how we think of AI today. Today we have LLMs, we have agents, we have all sorts of things that they just didn't consider. And so the mistake the category of mistake that is made is just by focusing on what is in vogue today, and let's imagine the same, but then lower price, more widespread, more diffuse, more adoption of the same technologies. And this is kind of common. So this is this famous paper, this influential paper by Frey and Osborne, which economists will have heard of, where they say the tasks computers are able to perform depend on the ability of a programmer to write a set of procedures or rules that appropriately direct the technology in each possible contingency. And again, if we read that today, that's nonsense. That's not true. That's not how AI works. So there's just this kind of strong anchoring on the current technology that exists and imagining that, but then slightly better and more efficient. I think this is also present in Daron Acemoglu's paper, this recent simple macroeconomics, where he holds fixed what LLMs can do, and he just imagines that becoming more efficient. And then he predicts that we're going to see this very meager effect of AI. And I agree that if you have GPT-4 and it just becomes more efficient, that probably wouldn't show up in GDP. But that's not what's going to happen. So I think that's kind of an interesting category of mistake. I think if I had to speculate, I think it just feels more scientifically scientifically respectable to not make up future capabilities, right? You want to be more grounded. You want to say, okay, we know it can do this, and so let's just imagine that, but then slightly better. But that results in this kind of mistake. There's this statistician called Jacob Steinhardt, which he has this term for this type of error, which is zeroth order forecast. That's kind of not the thing you want to be doing when you're actually interested in making predictions about how AI might unfold. I think other things are economists are just also kind of skeptical. So I think it's in part that they want to be more intellectually, scientifically grounded by doing this thing, but they're also kind of skeptical. So you might. Oh, you have a question?
Grounded on it. So it's all dissing economists, but there's actually a bigger set of people who think about this, and maybe more broadly, kind of what's your point? Because you're speculating, they're speculating, and so maybe it's time to get more granular about what the technology actually does, rather than everybody having an opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I just have spent time talking to economists about this, and I'm sharing my experiences.
Maybe you should have a broader range of people you talk to.
I do. I'm not an economist. I've left, economics, and I'm an entrepreneur.
I'm not either, but yeah, I'm just sort of noticing.
I do AI researchers more than I do economists these days. But I don't know. I just think this is.
We're honored that you focus on economists so much.
I mean, it's largely like I was doing economics research and I just got frustrated because I kept encountering these issues, and so I left. And so this is in part me sharing the frustrations that I encountered that resulted me in like leaving economics and doing something else. But yeah, I agree that a lot of other people think about AI, and I'm sure they make a bunch of mistakes as well. But I just this is like a topic that I know a lot about, so that's why I'm focused on it. So one interesting thing that I found is if you ask economists like what would happen if the global population increased by a factor of 10x, and then standard economic theory predicts that if you give enough time for capital adjustment to happen, your like global output should also roughly 10x, maybe slightly less, or maybe slightly more because of increasing returns to scale. But then if you ask them, suppose we have AI that can do everything humans can do, and we have like a 10x in the amount of like number of workers from AI, and then you ask like what would happen to GDP, like very rarely will they say that you get 10x output, even though you're basically asking the same question, because I'm assuming that those AI systems can do basically everything humans can do. And so I think this is like there's this unwillingness to entertain this hypothetical of AI that can do everything humans can do. Go ahead.
So I think in your current example, you're making an implicit assumption that you said the AIs can do everything that humans can do, but why would they want to, or why would they need to? Because human beings, we need food, clothing, shelter, all these other types of things that the AIs don't need, right? And also if human population doesn't grow 10x, right? If human population grows 10x, they all need food, clothing, shelter, all those things, right? So proportionally, GDP, everything should grow to meet those needs, right? But in the AI scenario, if human population stays at 1x, right, there's 9x of food, clothing, and shelter that the economy does not need to produce. The AI need to produce that, right? And just let me finish, right? So now there's this huge amount of demand that will never come forward, and there's no rationale for the AIs to produce that, right? So what will the AIs produce? The AIs will then have all this excess capacity, right? To produce what? It won't be those things. It would be, in essence, the things that the AIs want. And the AIs may not want the same things that we want, right? And so actually there's a chart by the Dallas Federal Reserve that's published on June 24th of this year. I don't know if you're familiar, chart 1, right? Because you classified that there were these different types of things that could slow down the progress, right? But really, I look at it as there is just two categorizations of what you had there. One is a question of when AI would happen, and you had like 4 or 5, 6 things that would slow down. There's one thing that's vastly different in that categorization, and that's what the chart 1 was showing. And that's if the AIs don't align with us, right? And that's the kind of point that I'm raising, that they may not want the same things, and all that excess capacity, they may not build or construct the things that we want, and it may not measure in our economy the way we do. And that's what chart 1 shows, because it shows that the effectively goes to 0.
So let me just suggest, it's great to have some questions here, but let's have them, until he finishes his talk, let's have him just be sort of like clarifying questions of, what's the x-axis? Like I didn't understand. And then hopefully, can you save a little bit of time for some broader questions that like this interesting one? Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, just to quickly respond, I mean, I think I agree there's like a bunch of things that are unclear about what that future might look like and what money is spent on and so on. I mean, one thing we know pretty confidently is that they do need GPUs and they're pretty expensive. So there's this part of the economy that will be much larger. In fact, someone recently did this calculation where they showed that like an H100 costs roughly the same as a Manhattan apartment in costs, and also the amount you need to heat it and so on, or like the amount of heat it produces or whatever. Anyway, so I think each AI system will probably require a bunch of these supporting infrastructure that you need to spend money on. And even if, like humans will own the relevant capital, presumably, and so that income is then earned by humans who then have the ability to spend on more consumption. Or maybe AI systems will also consume. It's kind of unclear. Anyway, so yeah, I think there's just this like conservatism among economists that they don't want to like entertain AI capabilities that are much beyond where we are currently. Yeah, I think there's other things in papers that they'll have this like they'll have this out where they model humans being able to always have this absolute advantage on some task. That there's always something which AI systems can't do, which humans can do, and so this also is like a they're basically building into their models this thing that like full automation is not possible, and I think that's something that I would like them to question or something. Yeah, I think maybe let's move on to questions. I think that might be more fun. So.
Oh, now we have time for more questions. Sorry, we just have a bunch of time. So all the way in the back there.
Hi, yeah, thanks for giving this talk. So my question was about the state of the economy and capitalism in, I guess, a super intelligent world. So I was thinking about it the other night, like the amount of problems in the world are so vast. Like you have death, you have multiplanetary travel, and even if we have a world where AI is better than humans at everything, for humans to not like be useful, we would need to basically solve all those problems, or humans would make those problems inefficient. Mm-hmm. So I guess I have two questions. One is like, do you think in like a super intelligent world where AIs are truly better than humans at everything, humans can still exist synergistically? And if not, like, what would the state of the world look like? Like people talk about a world of abundance, but like people still need to pay for that abundance. So where is that going to come from?
Yeah, great. I mean, there's a bunch of things there. I think in terms of where this comes from, humans earn incomes by selling their labor. That's the largest source of income for people in the US on average. But they also earn incomes from other sources, from investments, from 401ks, from owning property, from government transfers, and there's countries in which that non-labor income is a pretty substantial share. So in Norway, for example, it's like a larger share because they have these natural resource endowments. So in fact, it's not that hard to imagine a world in which the capital share of income just grows and becomes much larger relative to the labor share. And people might do pretty well, especially if overall income becomes just like much higher. And so you might lose out on your labor income, but that is more than offset by the income that you earn from non-labor sources. You might need more redistribution because some people might not own sufficient capital to be able to benefit from this, and they might not own any capital at all. But we've just seen this trend of governments becoming more generous over time in the US and elsewhere. And so I just expect something like that to continue, and I expect most people to be better off despite perhaps losing their ability to generate labor income.
I've got two questions, and if it's okay, I want to bundle into them in the background some of the recent posts you've had on the Mechanize site, because you've got this stuff about some technological determinism that I think is worth entering into discussion. All right, so first, as a general matter, if it's true that economists are disciplinarily or dispositionally conservative, I think it's equally fair to say that founders and tech bros are dispositionally boosterish about the future. So I'm hearing you with that as the background thought. On the aspirations for full automation and the recent arguments that they're compatible with the form of technological determinism, incentives matter very little, institutional design matters very little. I mean, I guess I just see wishy-washy thinking in not taking on board path dependence rather than determinism as a view here, an excessively optimistic view about what automation might bring. And to add, by my lights, insult to injury, it's not merely a descriptive claim you make, it's a normative claim you make that it would be affirmatively desirable that we fully automate in the ways you describe. So introducing a normative question into the conversation, I wonder if you could say a bit more, second question, about the normative or social vision that would accompany full automation. And this book, which made the rounds a year or two ago, Fully Automated Luxury Communism, I want to ask if you embrace a communist social vision.
Yeah, thanks. That's a very, very interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I think automation is good. I think this increases output by a lot and potentially by a very large factor. So we might see this like super exponential growth that I described, which would result in enormous abundance. And so people have the ability to consume much more. But perhaps what's even more important is that this would just enable this new, like all sorts of new types of goods that don't currently exist, that we can't even imagine. I think basic things that I'm excited about are just like radical progress in medicine, the ability to extend your lifespan and health span by a very large amount. And so I think those are some of the things that I'm most excited about. And I think that's what you need in order to achieve that, at least do that relatively quickly, is to have this kind of vast amount of automation so that we can have this much larger economy that is able to support the amount of innovation and the capital build out and all that's needed in order to support this incredible technological progress. And I agree that in general, it's hard to find changes in the economy that are like Pareto optimal. There's obviously going to be people who lose out from widespread automation, but if you take seriously this view that you can get drastic acceleration of economic growth, then that just delivers so much abundance that could just offset the kind of the loss of labor income. So one example is that if we only get a 10x increase in U.S. GDP, and if tax spending, the fraction of spending on welfare is the same fraction of output as it is today, that would be sufficient to set the retirement age at 18 and pay everyone $150,000 a year as soon as people turn 18. I think what's important is that we have like strong property rights. I think that's pretty important. So that is generically important in like a successful economy, that you're able to make investments and make sure that you can have some ability to predict what happens with the property that you build up and the capital stock, and that becomes perhaps more important in this world in which capital is the largest source of economic output. So in fact, I would predict, or I would want there to be kind of less ability for government to have this discretion over how much it taxes capital in this world, because capital just becomes more important, and so that just trades off against output. And so I think probably the optimal way of making that trade-off involves having less discretion in government for being able to take control over the capital stock. So I don't think this implies socialism. I think it just like you could just have this very generous government exist while at the same time having this very standard capitalist system that.
Okay, you called out Chad earlier.
Thanks. I thought it was really interesting. I was surprised you didn't bring out more on the bottlenecks view, because I know you and your colleagues at Epoch have written a lot about that. So I wanted to sort of at least lay out my interpretation of why economists are somewhat conservative on this. It seems to me that economists tend to like to think about, okay, what happens last year, what happens 40 years ago, maybe what happens next year, maybe what happens 10 years from now, but beyond that, who knows? And so even if one went out to 20 or 25 years, it does seem the bottlenecks point of view could matter a lot there. And you kind of alluded to this before. There's this question of, it gets harder and harder to automate things over time. And maybe the last thing's pretty hard to automate. And your view of the next 25 years seems very, very sensitive to what you think about how hard it's going to be to automate things. So just to back that up a little bit, the last 150 years have been 150 years of extreme automation, right? So electricity diffusing throughout the economy, transistors, internal combustion engine, et cetera. And so we've been automating a lot of stuff over time, and yet that straight line 2% growth. And so automation by itself doesn't necessarily do it. It really does hinge on this sort of 100% automation versus 99% automation makes a big difference. And so I'm wondering if you were thinking, yeah. So the bottlenecks view is we automate some things, and then the things that we there are lots of things we can't automate. Right? There are lots of things that we need humans to do now. There's the Moravec's law that you automate the stuff that humans are bad at first, but then the stuff that humans have been trained by evolution to be good at, robots and machines are pretty bad at. So someday I do think they'll get there. I don't think it's really just a question of, is it the next 10 or 20 years? Well, if an economist is going to say no, then they're not thinking beyond that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, just curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two parts here. So one part is like, when will the AI capabilities exist? And the other question is like, how strong are the relevant complementarities, and like what parts should we expect to be especially hard to automate for various institutional or regulatory reasons or something? And I mean, I think the first thing is that, in fact, if you get 99% automation, that would be sufficient to have this enormous expansion of economic output. If you like, there are estimates of the degree of substitutability between capital and labor, and if you have this input that you can assign to 99% of the tasks in the economy, and you can scale that arbitrarily high, that would just result in this enormous expansion of economic output. So I think you don't actually strictly need to think that you can automate 100% to still get like many orders of magnitude of increase in output. And then I think there's also this thing you have to think about, which is, if you automate, say, 99%, then you have this incredible expansion of the size of the world economy and our technological capabilities and so on. Why should you expect that final 1% not to be hastened by this kind of this fact that we can scale our economy so much? And so I would find that pretty unlikely that we just get held up on the final 1%. And then I think the other thing is that, like, you can talk to a bunch of AI researchers, and they'll give you their reasoning about why they expect AI to be able to do most things that the human brain can do, over the next 10 to 20 years or something. And they have a bunch of arguments, and I think those arguments are at least to some extent worth deferring to, because they are the relevant subject matter experts, and I think that is the appropriate epistemic thing to do in that case. And so, but I agree, there's uncertainty. Like I'm also kind of uncertain about what the future looks like. I'm very uncertain. I think a bunch of these questions are kind of unclear. I'm not super confident about the fact that we're going to get this accelerated growth or something. I think it's probably likely, but I think there's a good chance it won't happen.
So there's a number of questions, a lot of questions online here. A little bit, somewhat related to some of what Chad just brought up. One from Andrew van Noordenvliet about intellectual versus physical automation, which parts substitute for labor, and Roger Bone says that, or asks about, that if you said assume AI can do everything humans can do, well, a lot of that is physical, not intellectual. So maybe say a little, and he thinks the timelines for the physical is much slower.
Yeah. So Chad brought up this Moravec's paradox, which is this observation that it often seems like things that are hard for humans are easier for AI systems, and vice versa. Things that are easy for humans, like motory sensory skills, picking up a cup of coffee, those are trivial things that most adult humans can do, and they seem pretty hard for robots. I think this is like a kind of deep insight. I think one kind of explanation for why there seems to be this kind of paradox is that evolution has spent a lot of time optimizing us for doing like motor sensory tasks and things like that, because those are just those are very old skills. Like our kind of ancestors were able to do it. This is something that's very old in evolutionary time. It also confers this very large fitness advantage for you to be able to do it. If you can't like feed yourself, then you wouldn't survive. Whereas these like much newer skills like abstract reasoning and being able to play chess and do computer programming, those skills emerged much later during evolution. They emerged, language is roughly 100,000 years old. And so, evolution hasn't had a lot of time to optimize us to be very good at doing abstract reasoning. And when those abstract reasoning skills kind of emerged, they didn't confer very large fitness advantages, like being able to think through, and calculate things in detail. Those weren't very useful compared to being able to catch prey and so on. And so, so some of these kind of newer skills, like being able to play chess and Go and so on, those fell very quickly, and AI was able to make a lot of progress very quickly. Also, solving hard math problems, but we still haven't made a lot of progress on the kind of fine sensory motor skills that humans can do today. So, I just expect that to take longer. How much longer is kind of hard to say. I think you can. There's a bunch of things that are quite tricky about robotics, and one thing is that it's kind of hard to simulate this very well. So you need these very high fidelity simulations, and you need very good physics solvers, and those are pretty expensive. So I just expect it to take much longer to automate the physical stuff. But just automating kind of white collar work would itself be enormously valuable. So roughly a third of US workers do jobs that can be done remotely. There's this famous paper that came out during COVID that tried to estimate this. Actually, that paper is like not very good, but I kind of, the methodology is not that great, but I do believe that roughly a third of work can be done remotely. And if you can automate, half of that, that would just be, very economically valuable. That's trillions in dollars per year. And so that could contribute a lot to economic growth. So I think that probably will happen sooner and generate a lot of value, and then robotics will fall maybe a decade later.
Okay, we have lots of questions, about 10 minutes left. So let's go, Ray.
So maybe this goes back to the Chad's argument, but we do have some use cases of AI technologies which are out there in the world and making progress, and in particular, self-driving cars. And the thing that interests me about self-driving cars is that, yes, there is progress, but it's taken a heck of a long time. And we are still only deploying them in places where the conditions are favorable, so we're not there, and I don't think we're anywhere close to being able to deploy these on a broad scale. And the problem with self-driving cars is you need to add nines to the reliability of the system in order to do the deployment. And so that's an argument that Rod Brooks has been making for years. And I think he's a very good source of sanity with respect to what it takes to actually deploy a product. And my main concern with a lot of the deployments of the purely electronic, the purely mental parts of AI now is that we're not looking at what it takes to add a 9 to the reliability of the systems.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said. I think self-driving has taken like 20 years, and it's not yet something that's solved by any means. I think one reason to expect this is because of the Moravec paradox type thing, where like being able to navigate these open-ended environments and use your sensory motor skills and your vision and so on is just something that's pretty hard for AI. To be clear, I'm not claiming that any of this is going to be solved anytime soon. the thing that I would defend is if it were solved, then it would have this enormous impact. I'm not saying that this will be solved in the next 10 years. Like, I'm more uncertain than a bunch of the AI people, like Paul Cristiano, who thinks that we have Dyson spheres by 2040, or thinks there's a good chance. He would have to face this evidence that a bunch of things have taken so long. And but I don't agree that we're going to get like this enormous technological revolution in the next 10 years. Like, I think it's going to take longer than that.
So just a comment and question. I mean, the kind of duality of the economists and the technology. I mean, just for the record, there's lots of economists, as you know, that have much faster timelines. We just, Anton Koronek and Ajay and I organized a conference on economics of transformative AI that Chad and a number of others were participating in, and sort of accepted a lot of the premises to explore that. And on the other side, to pick up on Rod Brooks, I mean, you've probably seen his blog. And one of the things that's very striking about it is not just self-driving cars. He's made, to his credit, lots of very specific technological predictions that at the time were way on the conservative end of most technologists. And then when he goes back and evaluates them, as you've seen, often they were either on target or even too optimistic. So how do you reconcile? Is it just that maybe part of your last answer was addressing that it's not happening yet, or how would you specifically grapple with Rod Brooks's data?
I guess I don't necessarily disagree. I'm not sure why I should have to grapple with it, because
he's a technologist.
Sure.
So if you had him instead of Paul Cristiano, you would have had like a different archetype of that.
Yeah.
So maybe I misread, but I got the sense that you were more comfortable with the technologist's perspective, or the optimistic perspective, I should say.
I mean,
so that optimistic perspective versus Rod Brooks, you talked to him. I mean, he's around here. He's more conservative than a lot of economists, but he has a lot of technological expertise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are a bunch of technologists who are very skeptical of, or like much more conservative, and some of that conservatism is justified, because many things did take, in fact, much longer than people would predict, and you had people make these claims about radiology and self-driving and so on, and that like ended up being much slower than the technologists that like the relevant people and some AI experts predicted. And I think I mean, I don't have like a strong opinion about how fast self-driving is going to take, but I think it's taken like 20 years, so it might take maybe another 10 or something, would be my view, for more widespread adoption. Maybe might even take 20 years. I'm not sure.
And then after that, we'll start having a faster takeoff.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So you've had your hand up for a while. I'll give you a chance.
Thank you. And thank you. This is a very useful exercise. And I'm an economic historian. I was very happy to see you bringing some ancient history here. But I'm not sure if you're being probably, and it's probably not you, but like the endogenous growth people, too naive with this ancient data, right? So, I mean, if you zoom in a lot of this period, you see centuries and centuries of decline, right? So if you look at the Western world after the fall of the Roman Empire, right? And I guess that with that, I mean, what that makes me think is how much of this view is a conversation of a world without frictions, a world without shocks that profoundly disrupt society. So again, if you think about those episodes of decline in the past, you see destruction of technology, of knowledge. And maybe this conversation makes sense in a world where that is unfeasible, but maybe we're in a geopolitical context in which that's something we want to take into account.
Yep, I think that's right. I mean, I think this theory is just this nice, like, first order approximation of what is going on. And I think like then there's a bunch of second order factors that matter, like institutions and these like shocks from nature, epidemics, pandemics. But at the same time, it's pretty hard to find those on this plot, right? Like where's the Black Death here? Like it's not appearing very obviously, right? So I think the this overarching trend is just one that's pretty robust and that doesn't get affected very drastically by some of these events, and that's why I think they're more second order rather than first order. Now, if you zoom in, of course, you find a bunch of the Mongol Wars and the Black Death and so on, but it requires you to have to zoom in on.
We'll zoom in on the level of decades, not centuries, and you're making projections on decades. So, I mean, it wouldn't be impossible.
I don't think I'm making projections on the order of decades. I guess my claim is more that I think it's likely that this century will have this acceleration. Yeah.
Tens of decades. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Your last, thank you, very interesting intervention. Your last slide is asking what would change the beliefs of economists. And I think I tend to also embody the bias of economists to be very consequentialist and ask, okay, so if you're changing beliefs, it seems that you're engaging in a persuasive exercise to also change our behavior. What is the thing that you would like, ideally, the economics profession to do, actually, to change about how it's acting in the world?
Yeah, I think economists have quite a lot of influence in government, and I think that's pretty important. So for that reason, I think it's just important for them to have accurate beliefs about the future of the U.S. economy and the world economy. I want them to think about the labor market impacts of AI and the prospect of automation and reduction in the labor share. I think those are just pretty important questions that economists can have kind of a positive impact in shaping policy. And so for that reason, I think that's somewhat important. Yeah, I mean, I don't my first order thing is I just want them to have more accurate beliefs about much of this. And then I guess I also have some specific policy things that I would be excited for them to be more to kind of advocate and so on. But I think that's less important. I think I just care about them having better beliefs.
So I wasn't going to ask any question, but accurate beliefs, what does it mean to be accurate? I mean, they are the experts. It seems to me that you want to convince them to change all their methods, everything that they know, because economics existed before AI, will continue to exist to accommodate your own beliefs. And that is the fact that it's kind of scary about the whole big tech bro ethos, that they believe that they are gods, that they are going to tell everybody what to believe. So they want us to abandon everything that we know. So
yeah, I mean, I disagree with economists about what. I mean, I think my beliefs are more accurate. That's what kind of my disagreement exists. I have an estimate of a thing, and I think their estimate is wrong, and so I kind of disagree with them. And I think sometimes those disagreements are pretty valuable to resolve. And I've disagreed with experts about things. One important disagreement is that in 2021, I thought that the market was way too low on NVIDIA, and I disagreed with all the experts who were investing, and I bought a bunch of NVIDIA stock. And so sometimes those disagreements are just very valuable to resolve and try to point out. And so there's a lot of value you can generate by doing that. And so that's what I care about. But it's not I don't care that much either. I spend most of my time building my company, I guess. But because
So we are out of time. Thank you for that really stimulating discussion. A big part of the reason we have the Digital Economy Lab is to bring AI researchers and economists and lots of other disciplines together, because they often do view the world in very different ways. So that was very helpful. Our next seminar is a special one on Thursday, October 30th. The head of ADP, Neela Richardson, and I are going to discuss the methodology and updated results from the ADP National Employment Report, basically how they're doing that. As you may know, the BLS may or may not produce any employment reports. So we're doing that in conjunction with ADP. And we are also analyzing it, as Barhat and Ruyu presented a couple of weeks ago. So hope to see you Thursday for that webinar. Once again, thanks very much, Tamay.